Okay, so we went over some backbone models and sort of some general installation setup. We're going to try to move forward and get an app bootstrap going. First thing I want to do is uninstall some things. Before I sort of just changed my mind on where I wanted to put these. So we're removing Sinon and Chai, and we're going to download sinon.js. And the reason for that is our Chai and Mocha stuff is set up this way, so we might as well be consistent with ourselves. And not sure what's going on here. Let's save this link. Well, anyway, it's sinon.js.org, and I already have it installed. So you're going to want to put that in your test lib directory. You can see we've got it there already. And with that done, the next thing we want to do is make sure that our test index page actually includes it. And we're going to move some stuff around slightly. This will be sinon.js like that. Otherwise, the other stuff we're going to want to do is go into our components.js here, and we're not using these dependencies anymore, so let's remove them just so that we have that consistent. And the other stuff we want to do now is just kind of get our boilerplate setup going here for our application, and we're just going to create a div ID will equal app. This will be our main container for our application, and we're using Bootstrap, so we're going to do a container fluid here will be our main wrapper element. So we're going to be dynamically rendering stuff into here. Okay, so with that done, we're going to go into where this points. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this stuff so we can keep track of what it is. I think in a real project we'd want to keep it because there's some nice stuff. But so here's our main div, and then here's our RequireJS setup. It simply points to the source of RequireJS, and then it says data main and points to this main, and that's going to be where our relative paths are all rooted at. So let's go into that, open that up, and as you recall, we set up some paths. We no longer need Sinon and Sinon Chai, so let's remove those. Oops, sorry. Here we go. Let's remove mylib too, because that was just for playing around. Okay. And in fact, we actually don't need any more of this anymore. We're going to comment that out, and we'll be putting something else in there. We're actually going to kick off our app with this. We'll keep this commented out, and we'll use it for debugging if we need to. Probably delete it in a bit. We're going to include an app and then a views app, which we haven't created yet. That'll be our main app view. And we will create a function that takes the dependencies that we're asking for. Okay, and then in here we're going to create a main app, and we're going to new up our main app like this. And I don't even know if we needed to create this on the global, but we can remove that later because we're using RequireJS, and we have the flexibility to refactor that out later if we'd like. So what's going on here? App is not defined. So anyway, we're newing this up, right? So we actually haven't created this setup yet, because before we were testing out backbone models. what do we actually need here? Well, I don't think this is actually going to have any dependencies, so let's just remove our dependencies for now at least. And this is going to be a module. We're going to start with a constructor function and return this guy. I like to do this early because I have a habit of forgetting. And on this app's prototype, we're going to create a set of views, and that'll be just empty object. And we'll have a, whoops, did I say this views? Just be views. And then we'll have a function to start the whole app up here. And that'll just say this views and call our main app views render, just to kick things off. And this needs a semicolon. And then in here, we need to actually new up this new app view. So we could say this views app equals new app view, right? And then we could go ahead and stick views app in here, and then basically use RequireJS to inject this. And if you go back the way I'm calling it now, that's how it's working. But I don't like that style. I want to instead inject it into my constructor because it's a bad practice to new up new object instances in our constructor like this. It's better to pass them in. That makes it easier to use test doubles in our tests and generally makes our code more maintainable. It doesn't violate single responsibility or open-closed principles or all of the solid principles. So I don't have time to go into all the reasons why, but if you do some research, you'll see I think that's a better pattern to use. So we're still newing it up, and we could have newed it up outside, but at least we're actually passing in the dependency. Okay, so with that, well, we're going to need that app view now, right? So we don't even have a views directory. So let's create that now. And we also, yeah, we don't have a views directory. So let's take care of that now. So we're going to create another file called app.js because it's in the views directory. There's no reason to name it anything different because our app.js, we have an app.js in scripts, which is our main app, and then views has app.js, right? So this is actually going left to right in our sort of series of how we bootstrap. We go from index.html, we point to scripts main. In main.js, we set up our paths, and then we new up our main app and pass it an app view. And this is our new app. And it instantiates the app view and then calls render when we go back here and call start on the main app. And so to do all this, we actually need an app view, right? So let's create that. Our app view is going to be a module, and it actually is going to require some dependencies. We need backbone because it's going to be a backbone view. We'll need probably underscore, and we're going to want to use the RequireJS text plugin to include a text file, this HTML file. And with that, we can take in backbone underscore, and we'll call this main TPL for main template. And close that off. And so this is that familiar pattern in RequireJS where you create a module. And before we even forget, I'm going to just say return it here because I have a bad habit of forgetting to do that. It doesn't work if you don't do that. Backbone view extend. And with that, we're going to create a view that is going to insert itself into that pre-existing app. So if we recall over here, we created a div with an app ID and it's container fluid because we're using Twitter Bootstrap. So that's going to insert this whole guy in here, and that's going to use a template and we're simply going to take our main TPL and call the underscore template method with that. And then when we call start in our main application, that'll in turn call render on the main app view. Every Backbone view has a this dot $L, which refers to this element, and we're simply going to call jQuery's HTML function and compile our template in. And so we don't have this main HTML template yet, but whatever that is, it's going to get compiled and rendered into our Backbone view, which in turn is going to go in here. Okay, so that should all sort of make conceptual sense. We're going to just return this as a good citizen from our Backbone render. And I think I'm pretty happy with that setup. And from there, we got to go create this template now, right? And we haven't yet set that up in our paths. So let's set up, first we need to point to the RequireJS text plugin, which is in components because we downloaded it with bower.js. And that should get that dependency. And then we want to have a template that points up a directory and over into templates, because it really doesn't belong in app scripts to my mind. It's a static stuff. So we'll put it in apps by creating a directory there. And let's go ahead and create that main HTML. Some people call it .tpl. I think you can name it whatever you want. I'm going with main.html. And for here, going back to our container div, we're using Bootstrap, so we just want to follow the Bootstrap conventions here, and we're going to, how are we going to do this? We're going to set up a class, and this will be a row fluid, and then within this div we'll create some more divs that take the class of left and span 2, and do another one. This will be right but span 10. And just for debugging purposes, we'll say this is going to be a sidebar, and this is going to be the main content, just so we have something to look at when this all renders. Okay, so with that done, let's go trace our execution path one more time. We enter into our main index page, point to scripts main. In scripts main, we set up our RequireJS paths and inject in here an app and an app view. We new up our main app. You can think of this as an app manager. In fact, we could have called this app manager or app mediator or something, but it's our main app. And we inject an app view. And then once we've newed up this main app instance, we call it start method. If we go over into app, we'll see that in fact it takes an app view and it instantiates that. And when start is called, it calls its render method. And here's our app view. It's just a Backbone view, so far with not much. But the interesting part is that it takes this RequireJS text file. It's actually a template, but RequireJS text allows us to do this, and we call it main TPL, and we use underscores template utility to basically compile this markup, and we inject it into the Backbone view's HTML, and we return all this using the conventions of RequireJS, so we still have to return this as a module. So with all that being said, let's see if this actually works. I probably made a mistake somewhere. Usually do. An unexpected token in line 25. So, line 25 of main. So let's try to figure out what Rob did wrong here. Well, I didn't put a comma, so that would screw up the parser. And here we go. If we do Command-Shift-C on a Mac, we can hover over these and see that there's our span 2 and there's our span 10. And we're good to go. So we've got our content rendered and we have this whole intricate bootstrap set up. Let's create some tests real quick. We want to basically kind of put a verification step in here so that as we refactor, we don't break things. So the first thing we want to do is to go into our test index file. And we've already set that up properly. Let's go into our specs. We're not going to need this mylib spec anymore, so let's zap that. And let's go into this app spec. And this was all Backbone tests. We were learning Backbone with this, so we're going to delete that. And what do we actually need here? Well, I'm using a new naming convention that I saw the dailyjs.com guy do, and I really liked it, where you set up your RequireJS modules like this. It's just a lot more readable. And in fact, I've used his Backbone tasks where he syncs to his Google Tasks API as a point of reference for some of the stuff I've been doing. So it's where I guess I'm giving kudos and saying go look at that too. So we do need to add our app view, which is in views app, and let's put that dependency in here. And first thing we want to test is that, well, as we saw when we ran our sort of first manual spot check, that it should bootstrap the app, and we set it up to take an app view dependency. So let's test that. Okay, so let's make this a little smaller so we can see what's going on. So let's see, we just want to new up an app, and we have app, and we're going to do the same thing we did in our main.js. We're going to inject that with an app view. And at this point, we just want to confirm that, well, my app is an instance of a Backbone. Whoops, it's actually, my app has a views app object, which represents an app view, otherwise a Backbone view, right? So it's an instance of Backbone.view to equal true. And while we're at it, we probably should say that it's an instance of app view, right? And these are the types of tests that, frankly, I'd probably delete at some point, but it's a good starting spot. So let's run test. By the way, if you run PHP Storm's debugger, it seems to use the same port. So I had to turn that off or stop listening on it because I didn't have a port conflict on port 9000. There is a chance you've got that going and make that same mistake, so don't do that. So these pass. Let's force a failure, like I so famously love to do. I just want to see it fail and make sure that got things set up correctly. And if we're not doing tests first here, obviously, so if we were doing tests first, we would have written these, we would have required that we have a fail first in real test assertions, but we're sort of just getting set up, and so we're sort of breaking those rules. But we should also expect that my app views app has a render function, right? So let's use underscore. We've included it. It has a nice handy is function. And we're going to say that that's going to equal true. Let's run that. And that should work. Okay. That's sort of a first stab. Let's do something a little more interesting. Let's say that when we call start on the main app, it should render the main app. We'll word that a little differently. It should render main app view when start is called. Okay. And we can just take this guy and get started. And we're going to want to use a stub. So right here we see we're already starting to use some duplication. So let's take advantage of before each. So we'll say var my app, and we'll say there's a before each spec. And we'll have an after each too. So before each, we're going to say my app equals new app that takes an app view. Right, and so now we can delete these two lines. And then after each, we'll just null that out. And the other thing we want to do is we said we wanted to stub out. How do we want to say this? We want to stub out some dependencies and make sure that they get called. So we're going to create a sandbox here. Let's space this out a little more thoughtfully here. So sandbox is going to equal a new sinon sandbox create. And this is sort of a forward reference for you that for those of you that haven't used Sinon. Sinon is a library for using test doubles, mocks, and whatnot, right? So what you need to do is when you mock something, let me just do an example here. Say we had var Ajax stub equals Sinon stub, and then you could say take jQuery, or probably just the $, and then pass it a string representing the method. And what it'll do is it'll actually hijack that whole method, and you'll be able to see how it got called and whatnot. So if you don't do anything, it'll just hold the reference to this method, and you're eventually going to want the real jQuery Ajax, right? And so you just call Ajax stub restore like that, right? And then now you're back to being able to call Ajax and reach the real jQuery. Well, the problem is that if you do a bunch of these, it becomes unruly and you have to restore all of them. So using the sandbox, we can call restore in the after each on the sandbox, and any number of stubs and spies that we've created on the sandbox will get removed. So that's kind of nice. So let's create over here, let's just start out by creating a stub equals sandbox stub my app views app, and we're going to stub out the render. So stubbing is going to intercept any calls to that method and prevent it from actually executing, whereas a spy would actually proxy through to the original method. So if you're going to spy or stub jQuery Ajax, you actually probably want to use a stub usually in that case, because you don't want HTTP requests, live HTTP requests in your tests. So we don't want render to happen, so we're stubbing that. But probably would be harmless to have it as a spy as well. So now we're not going to have to do this line because we're doing it on the sandbox. It's getting done by the sandbox calling restore up here and after each. Okay, so now what do we actually want to do with this? Well, let's simply call my app start and say that we expect the stub to be called. That's what we said in our description, right? When you call start, it should render our main app. So for now, that's a fine assertion to verify that. And what would happen here? Well, let's run the test. Okay, so that works. So the reason why we would want to do something like this is because say you go in here and you change this to render HTML or whatever, right? That would start to break things. So in our code, if we spot checked our app, it wouldn't run because, well, I would actually, if you had changed it here to render HTML, right? And then you go back over here, it's being called as render. Well, if you spot checked it, something simple like that, probably catch, but now we're catching it in an automated way. And if you decide you want to change something to render HTML, fine, but go ahead and refactor your calling code and your tests, and at least you have like a little litmus test to be aware that this stuff is happening. So let's call grunt test, and we should pass. So there we go. We actually have some code. Sorry about all these lint errors. I didn't properly set up. I didn't probably set up a JS hint config file to say that, well, all these things can be ignored. We'll do that later. Then it'll be easy enough. But we're making some actual real tests that mean something here, and we've got our whole app bootstrap. One more time, we start at index.html, we zoom into main, which sets up the paths, and everything now is going to be relative to app scripts. And we set up our templates, which is actually up a directory and over into templates and whatnot. So, and then here we actually bootstrap our app, calling our main app.js and app scripts, and that in turn will instantiate an app view, which calls render, which will actually use underscores template to compile our template with some markup and stuff it into our view. And that actually all gets stuffed back in here in our index page in our wrapper container. And we're off and running. So I think we're in a good place to stop here. Have a good one.